Today's session, Transparency in SEO, a look inside the black box, will be presented by Ryan Horner. Ryan is Managing Director of Technology at One North. Ryan has more than 15 years of experience architecting, designing, and managing technology teams, and is responsible for overseeing One North's strategy related to technical applications, systems, and client implementations. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Ryan.
Thanks, Tanya. We've gotten really a lot of interest in this webinar topic. We've got a lot of people attending, and we're really happy to see that. And as we talk to clients, we're also getting a lot more questions, and there's a fair amount of confusion and a lack of clarity around this topic. So we're really happy to talk about it and hopefully clear some of that up. So these two comics showcase what a lot of people historically have thought about SEO, in that it's this black box with a lot of confusion, and that you need specialists to help you understand how to make sense of it and how to have success in search engine rankings, or that you need to spend a lot of money and be able to buy your way to the top of search engine rankings. And I think we'll find today that, in a little bit of foreshadowing here, that that's not true anymore. And so part of doing that, our objectives and our agenda will be to explain how search engines work. We kind of take it for granted when we go to google.com, type in our search, and get the answers. We'll go through an interactive page that Google has created to highlight and show what's actually happening behind the scenes. We'll talk about what is the impetus for change, what is different now than in the past regarding transparency and openness for search engine rankings. And then we'll spend most of our time talking about a big picture view that industry expert has put together to understand what affects the success in ranking, sort of a simplified view that gives you everything you need to know to bake into your other efforts about SEO. And then we'll quickly touch on some tools that can give you insight into how your website is currently performing, and maybe some advice on things that you can tweak. Some third-party free tools. So how do search engines work? Google has put together this page, which I'm pulling up in a browser, a really great interactive page. And the first thing to note is that when you're searching Google, you are not searching the web in real time. What you're doing is you're searching the index that Google has put together from crawling the web that they've been doing since they existed and keep updating. So this crawling, it's traversing every page, and on every page, it's looking for all the links on that page to find new domains and new pages to crawl. There are 30 trillion individual pages, and I'm sure that number is quite a bit bigger than when this was created, which is a mammoth number to consider. So when Google goes to crawl that, it's looking on every domain, every page, mining for links to find additional pages. That's the hypertext. That's the markup that's linking the web together, spidering it together. And then it sorts those pages based on the content and the topic to try and structure it into an index. And that index of those 30 trillion pages is over 100 million gigabytes. So just a massive amount of data, the entire web, that is findable and visible to Google or other search engines, all in an index. And that's what you're actually searching when you go to google.com and type in a query. So as you search, before all the results come back, it's doing massive calculations on your term, over 200 factors that it's analyzing based on your term, comparing it to the index, and then coming back with results. It's considering things like site and page quality, how fresh the data is, whether it's old or stale, whether you have safe search turned on, any sort of context about other searches you've done or who you are, what your interests are, where you are. And it churns through all that information and then comes back with search results, search engine results pages formatted for the device that you're using, whether that be a mobile device or a PC. And an important part of all this is that Google is fighting spam. It is absolutely essential that they have relevant results for end users. That's their value. And there are many factors that make pages or sites spammy that Google wants to get rid of. And that's part of what has changed, is the abuse of the search engines. So that's how search works, that we all sort of take for granted in our day-to-day use. So what's made this change where Google and other search engines want to be more open? The black box is really defined by them to say, don't worry about how we do this stuff. We're not going to share what our algorithms are. We're just going to give you good results, is how search engines started. And then around 2008 or 2009, there started to be, I don't know if other people noticed this, but there were some rumblings about maybe Google wasn't the right search engine to use because the results they were giving were not valid or relevant or good results that you wanted to find as a searcher. So I pulled up this screenshot from 2009. If you search for a specific, there are many different types of search. It's just a specific type of search for a car part for a particular model. And if you look down at the results that are given back from this, you can see that this domain is kind of a junk domain. And the summary for this top result for that given search term actually lists other car models. So it was just a bunch of keywords on a page. So as a user, for someone who's actually searching to find this motor part diagram, you're getting results back from Google which don't answer your questions. This is search spam. And as a $300 billion company that's defined a verb in our language to not do what it's founded upon, that's a deal breaker for them. That is risking their entire enterprise. So they have to take this very seriously, that when you type in a search term, they're giving that end user great search results. And when it was a black box that could be gamed and tricked, it got to the point that there were sort of black hat or abusers of that algorithm that would jump to the top, and the actual organically good results no longer were surfacing. So this started a bit of a sea change to open up and be transparent about what they do. And instead of thinking about SEO as trying to match the algorithms for how you specifically get to the top of search results, they said what you need to do for SEO, and this is the quote from Matt Cutts, their head of the Google Web Spam team, is focus on creating high-quality sites that create a good user experience. It's about great content. It's about creating web experiences that people want to come back to, that people want to link to. And I think a lot of people know that Google had a famous mission or motto of not being evil. And as a website owner getting pushed down in the results, that can feel like they're sort of punishing you. But that's not the perspective that Google has. They're not there to surface sites to the top. What they're there to do is serve end users search queries with the most relevant page or content for that given question. So it's about deserving to be on the top, about earning that, because that's what is going to serve Google and keep people coming back to Google, is that great results. So as a part of this openness and just transparency, they've talked a lot about what the considerations are for ultimately being successful for given searches on users. And this is a very dense picture, infographic. It's the periodic table of SEO success factors. It is written by Search Engine Land. It's not a One North created product, but it's sort of beautiful in the way that it assimilates and boils down a ton of knowledge and information into just one page, which, while dense, gives you everything you need to know to see the big picture of SEO. And we're going to spend time going through this, looking at each one of the categories, each one of the columns, to understand how those relate to SEO success. Now, it's important to know that these factors do work together. They're not atomic. They don't stand on their own individually. They're representative of things that make sense to do, that are good to do. They are ranked on a relative basis. So you'll see on these periodic tables that you've got numbers in the top right from -3 to +3. The positive numbers are actually obviously going to help your ranking. The negative numbers are indicating things that will hurt you in ranking. And the relative, 3 being more important than the others. They're all important to make it on this chart. But if you have to prioritize, spending time on the higher numbers obviously makes more sense. And there's two divisions to this chart at the highest level. There are things on the page for SEO. These are factors that you as a website owner, publisher, developer can directly contribute to. There are things like the content that exists on your site, doing high-quality content, using the right words that's very engaging and fresh. That helps SEO value. It's the HTML that your site is written in. That's the code when you view source in a browser that makes the browser render the ultimate page that the end user sees. Do you have the right HTML tags with the right words in the titles, in the meta description, in the headers, and is it structured? Then there's the architectural components for the way that your site is built. Is it visible to Google? Do you have a lot of duplicate content on different types of URLs? Are you using friendly URLs, and is your site very performant? We're going to go through all of these things in detail. So those are the things on the page that affect SEO. But it's also apparent to Google that it can't, or other search engines, it can't entirely trust what you're telling it on your website. It needs other factors and criteria to determine whether you're a valuable page or domain that it should recommend to its searchers. So there are a number of factors that have been added that are part of the consideration that are having more and more of an impact than even what's on the page that you directly control. So these are things like the inbound links. If a lot of pages on the web or other domains on the web link into your site, and the sites that are linking to you are of high quality, that's going to increase your SEO value. If you are a trustworthy site, if you've been around for a long time as a domain, if the links that you have outbound to other people are not spammy, they're to other authority sites, that's going to increase the value of you as something to recommend to searchers. And then there's the social factors. Using social media, people are going to share links to sites and information that they find valuable. So there's sort of the wisdom of the crowd. The information that people share with each other is something that Google can take advantage of to say if they're sharing it with, between themselves, it's probably something that should surface higher to the top the more it gets shared for a given search term. And there are personal factors as well. If you're in a particular country, Google knows that there are certain topics or a certain lexicon that it should filter out if you're in one country or another, or specific locale. If you're looking for a pizza in your local region, it's not going to show you something in another state or country. So we're going to go through each one of these factor areas. And the first one is an on-the-page factor around architecture. And the highest level goal that is trying to be achieved by all of these elements is it easy to access your website? If you remember back to seeing how Google works, how a search engine works, it has to crawl your site to be able to put it into the index. And so the first aspect, which is obviously critical, but fairly easy to achieve, is can your site be easily crawled? There are a few things to watch out for when you're doing that. Google can make some sense of Flash and JavaScript, but if you have navigation that's really hard for a website for Google to transform and be able to view all of your links, then it may not be able to traverse your entire site and index it. So doing things like adding a sitemap, making sure your site is accessible will make it such that every link you have is visible. Anything you have behind a web form that you can't get to that content without submitting that form is something that Google won't see. So that's another consideration. But you can easily check this stuff with some of the tools that we'll see at the end to see how crawlable your site is. It makes it really transparent. Another factor of the architecture is duplicate content. So if you're an international site and you have multiple top-level domains based on the region, right? So you could have website.com and website.co.uk, for example. And if those two domains show the exact same content, Google's going to think that there's something not right there. It's going to think that you might be trying to reuse content. It doesn't know that they're affiliated. So if you're actually going to have multiple URLs to show the majority of the same type of content, make sure that you're handling that duplicate content well. You really shouldn't be showing that duplicate content. It's something that, if you do well, will increase your SEO value. Speed. This is something I think a lot of people have heard doesn't influence SEO. But it's really more about your end users. And this is where what SEO has become now is more website optimization. If you get to be the top link in any of the search engines and people click on you, you've sort of won that SEO game. But if your site, if any other factors like your site being really slow makes people not want to wait for the site and leave, then it doesn't matter what your SEO ranking was, right? You're trying to create a great website experience, a great end user experience, to give them the information that they're looking for. And that's really how performance comes into play. As you lose users, the slower your site gets. It's a small factor for overall SEO value. But that's why you should care. Vanity URLs and friendly URLs make it really easy for Google to see that there are specific words that a person might be searching on, and if that's in a URL, then it's going to be much easier to match those things. I think a lot of people are aware of this as sort of a core SEO thing, and makes a lot of sense. This is also a factor that outside of just search engines, people roll over links in Google results pages, and they see what that URL is, and that's going to allow them to decide whether to click on it or not. So your URL is not just how do we give the right URL such that Google thinks that we're important and should be near the top, but it's what does a human do when they see this URL, and is it something that's compelling to them to click on? So it's always part of the consideration. And mobile, with the increase, the percentage is just going exponential for mobile usage on the web, including doing searches. Google is also, and other search engines, are starting to take into account and calculating how you treat those mobile users into whether you should be a recommended URL or page for any given search term. In particular, just a couple weeks ago, they released that they were having some updates that if you have someone on a mobile user, does a search, if it links into an internal detail page, but then if you realize that they're a mobile user and you redirect them back to the home page, which I know a number of sites do on the web, that they're actually going to punish you for that. Because what you're doing is you're creating a bad user experience, where I search for something very specific as a user. I see the link going to that specific detail page on Google, and I click on it using my mobile device, and what your website does is redirects me back to the home page because you don't have that specific detail page available for that device and that form factor. And that's something that is affecting SEO. So again, it's a simple concept. Are you doing the right thing by the user? That's the question too. If you're doing that, then you're doing the right thing by SEO, rather than knowing a bunch of these, arcane rules. It's what serves searchers' interest the most. So it makes it much more intuitive to think about. And mobile is obviously a part of that has to be a consideration when you're creating a good website experience. And responsive design is the answer that a lot of people are coming with for that. So this red element is one that is actually a punishment if you're doing it. This is something that I doubt many people are doing anymore because Google is so good at punishing it. which is actually showing a different thing to Google than you would to end users. That would allow you to sort of stuff a bunch of keywords in to Google's response, but then to get a high ranking on page results. But then when a user clicks on that, you're giving them an entirely different thing, like an ad for something else you want to sell. It's sort of a bait and switch. And that's obviously something that is bad for searchers, and Google is not going to allow. So more on-the-page elements. This category has to do with underlying HTML, and people likely think of this as a core SEO thing to be aware of. And it's about making it clear what your page is about. So in particular, if you view source behind any given page, you're going to see HTML. And there are a couple tags which are really important for both end users, people, and search engines to determine what the content and whether they want to click on this link and show this link. And one of the key ones is the HTML title tag. And when you get that the list of Google results, it is listing the HTML title tag. So certainly the keywords you have in there, if that matches the keywords people are searching for, is going to have a high correlation to whether you're going to come up on top. But what you have here is your first interaction to a person to say, is this something that they want to click on? So it's your first chance to be engaging and be something that pops out at them that they want to visit. The meta description, this is something that you don't see when you view a given page, but the meta description is a tag near the top of the HTML that allows you to tell programs, search engines, what the page is about. And there was a lot of debate over the last couple of years, but there's a fair amount of clarity that it doesn't really affect what your search engine rankings are because it's so easy to abuse and stuff it with keywords. But what it does do is it's used as the summary on the search engine result pages. So when you search Google, the summary or the block of text underneath the title and the URL is often coming from this meta description. It's also something that is used on Facebook and other social sites to use as a summary when you link to something. And so this is a chance for you to have a block of text to, again, compel users that you're the answer to the question and the information that they're looking for. Further down on a page, there are these things called header tags. In HTML, it's like less than, H1, greater than, and those are structural elements that you put in pages that often signify different sections of a page and therefore have a fair amount of significance and are likely indicative of the type of information you're trying to convey and talk about. And therefore, for SEO, they have a fair amount of value. So make sure using those tags with the type of content that you are talking about. This is a new thing. So the notion of a semantic web has been around for a while. People may not have heard that much about it, but it's the notion that you can structure data. So rather than just free-flowing blocks of text, which is hard for computers to make sense of, you can actually have a structure or an agreed-upon standard for how you will mark up pages to indicate, for example, that a particular block of text is talking about a person, and that person has an address and a phone number and an email, or that it's an address which has, address multiple lines and then a country or a city or postal code of some kind. And Google is really pushing this. Some of the tools we'll see at the end makes it really easy for you to mark this stuff up. And when you search Google and you see stuff on the right side that isn't ads, when you're searching for people or you're searching for music, it's able to bring up that more structured, targeted content in a specific way because pages are marking up their data with a structure. A lot of e-commerce sites are doing this now, so you can see how many stars a particular product has been ranked for, what its price is. Structured data makes it much easier to ascertain that by Google. There are a couple violations on the HTML side. One is stuffing. So for a given keyword, if you are using that word many, many more times than would be likely for proper content or quality content to describe that amongst your text, then Google's going to start assuming that you're just trying to game them into being a top result and not that you actually have important stuff to say about that keyword. So stuffing is overuse of a particular keyword. And then there's the ability, you can essentially hide things from end users by using white text on a white background. If you're doing that kind of stuff, you're obviously trying to trick and deceive. So the final and perhaps most important area of SEO and the success factors is the content that you have on the page. This is the reason you have a site. This is what you're trying to convey to end users. And there's a lot of content out there. And like we saw, 300 trillion pages of it. And to stand out, to deserve and earn to be at the top spot, you need to be providing unique value to visitors. And that's what your content is really about. Quality content. This has overlap on virtually every other factor, especially many of the off-the-page factors, which we'll talk about. Because if you have great content, if you're doing content marketing and sharing that with people, people want to link to you. People talk about you on social networks and say, check this out, this is unique thought leadership. This is valuable to me. This gave me something I didn't have before. This answers the question I was looking for. That's what Google, for other search engines, want to put at the top of their search engines. And part of content quality is also not having misspellings. There are multiple algorithms that are run to make sure you're at the appropriate reading level for the content. If you get into too much inside jargon, that can actually punish you. If you have typos, that can punish you. So quality content means everything about that. As a consumer of that content, unbiased, would you consider what you're doing quality? That's what you're going for. This one is more awareness. So have you researched the keywords people use to find your content? So if people are searching for an attorney in a particular practice area and they type in attorney in city and then the practice area and search, but you on a website you talk about law firm all over the place and don't use the word attorney, then you're missing things. You need to be communicating. Your content needs to convey the topics in the language using the words in the lexicon that your searchers are actually using. Otherwise, you're not going to make those matches. It's not going to be obvious that the relevancy is tied together. So know your audience, know how they're trying to find you or not find you is going to allow you to tailor your content to make that match. And of course, the words you're using are the ones that are going to make those matches. So this is a very interesting one. So Google is going to reward sites in its SEO rankings if people go there and stay. So if you go, click around other pages on the site, if you don't bounce away quickly, so if you click on that top search result and then you go back to Google and click on the second one within a couple seconds, that's a really strong indicator that it did not answer that question. It failed, actually, and maybe if you see enough of that across a number of people, it shouldn't recommend that site anymore. So you can actually start losing value just because people are bouncing away from your site. And you can't be stale. The content needs to change. I mean, there's some exceptions in some domains of, dictionaries and that kind of stuff that can have content that stays the same. But for most topics and for most SEO success, it's about having fresh content that has hot topics in quotes that allows people to link to you and for you to be adding unique value. And there are a couple of violations of this which can be a little tricky to know whether you're doing or not. If you create a site with a lot of highlights and a lot of templates and reuse content around, you can actually deceive yourself into thinking you have lots of content when you look at lots of individual pages. But make sure you look at each page and say, what's unique about this page relative to every other. If you realize you've only got a paragraph or so on that page, and the rest of it is highlighting and linking off to elsewhere in your site, you may actually have a fairly thin content that's not going to serve you for SEO success. And if you have ads all over your site, that's something where you're not really trying to serve the end user with the great content or quality content. You're just trying to get them to click on your ads, and it's clear that the content is a byproduct of that. So those are all on-the-page factors which you can control, and they all center around, are you creating a great experience with the information you're sharing and the ability, the experience you have on that site. Then there's a whole set of factors for off the page. And these are things in this category about inbound links. So it's very useful to understand if a site is worthy of bringing up in a search result if a lot of other people link to it. So do quality sites link to you? And what does quality site mean? A quality site is one that's been around for a long time. It's sort of one of those things that people describe when you see it, you know it, right? So if New York Times links to you, that's a quality site. You know, name brand marquee sites linking to you multiple times is going to give you a lot of authority and give you much higher rankings, and rightfully so, because you've earned a bit of this editorial review to say this is useful content. Right? That's what that link is telling to search engines. If you have a ton of links from really low quality sites, meaning sites that were just created with domains that don't contain actual words, that don't have other content on them, that can actually punish you, right? So these inbound links have a big effect indicating whether there's value on that page or not, regardless of whether the keywords match or whether the URL is good for that given term. And part of that link, right, this is the way the web works. It's hypertext markup language. When you link from one page to another, you have text that you click on for that link. And that text gives an additional chance to try and compare keywords and to understand context and topic. So, for example, if you have a blog to different domains of your site and you're constantly linking back to your main site, but every time you put link text in, you say click here for more, all Google knows or all search engine knows is like, I guess this is about clicking here, rather than a proper subject to say, you know, a particular person's name or a particular topic area that's a hot topic or of interest. That's going to give you a lot better value. It's going to make it a lot more clear to end users what they're going to get, and therefore it's going to have benefit to your search engine rankings. So if you're purchasing links and that's made clear, you actually get blacklisted, so you will get removed completely. So this does not pay off in any way, and that Google in particular is aggressively trying to identify these things, and it's virtually shutting down that business because it's counter to what you're actually purchasing, the opposite. And then if you're going out to lots of forums or sites and linking back to yourself in an obviously sort of spammy way, and I think a lot of people have seen this on blogs where you just see something that doesn't relate in context or topic in any way as a forum posting, just check out my site. It's actually not that hard to decipher those things. So while links off the page are really important and you don't have direct control over them, trying to take direct control can backfire. So it goes back to great content. If you have great content, if you have engaging, fresh content that people want to link to, this happens, right? So that allows you to focus your efforts there and yield benefits here. So another big factor is, are you trustworthy? And this is something where you aren't given trust. You have to earn it. And this one's a bit hard if you're a new site, if you're a new entity, because you don't have history. History is what gives you validity and allows a search engine to make a recommendation that you're great content. So a little bit of this one is just time if you have a new domain. But if you have a domain and it's been around for a long time and you've had a site and hasn't done anything abusive, you should sort of be on even keel on this one. As far as identifying yourself, having names, having phone numbers on your site makes it clear that there are real people behind this, and Google does pick up on those kind of things and say, all right, that means that there's a greater chance that there's real value here. There's humans behind this that aren't trying to trick or game in any kind of way. And then just your actual domain in DNS, if you list individual people behind that as opposed to a company, that can also have a small factor effect. Same thing happens for end users, right? When we looked at that first screen, the search from 2009, when you search for that motor part and you saw these domains that were nonsense, that had many levels of subdomains that didn't have real words in them, as a human, I don't trust that. Google's the same way. And increasingly, there are these off-the-page factors which are showing a lot of fidelity in indicating what content is useful, what content is something that's good to surface to the top of search engine rankings, is how much the social networks are talking about and linking to a given topic or a given page in a given domain. And this is about quantity and quality. Who are the trusted, who have a lot of people following them, and then if they link to you, that's going to have a lot more value than 100 or 1,000 people that have virtually no one following them linking to you. To the point that actually could punish you if you can create a lot of social accounts very quickly. You can even automate that and then link to yourself. That's not, again, that's a game and a trick, and it doesn't indicate that it's something useful that that page has. So those social factors are important. Now, that's not to say that you can't do things on social networks that do link back to yourself. That's important. That's part of developing a community, is that you have your own social presence, and in that way link back to other people rather than just your site and hoping that other social accounts link to you. Right? So that's not spammy to promote yourself. It's just when it becomes abusive. But again, some of the things like links in your social profiles or your tweets can matter here to add to context about the keywords that are being used. So think about that. As an end user, when you see that tweet, is it compelling? Is it clear what it's giving you? Not just click here, we have a press release. That would be the minimum bar for something you wouldn't do that doesn't help that much. So thought and engagement in that content has a big impact. And there are other personal factors which come into play as well. As a global firm or global company, some of these are less likely to apply. But for specific locales, Google's doing a much better job figuring out local establishments or retail places or restaurants, as it were, to link you to. Some of that has to do with structured data, and some of that has to do with the local networks in social networks that it's used to map out where places are. And there's a small factor in play about the context you have with what places like Google know about who's in your network. There's an understanding or an assumption that if those people that are in your network like certain things, that it's much more likely that you will like that than any other sort of factor to indicate what you will like, which makes a fair amount of sense. So it's your social network coming more into play for personalization of search results to you. So that's the big picture. When you first see this, it feels like a lot. It feels really dense. But there's a beauty in having everything you need to know and all the key concepts on one page that you can print out and sort of reference to put other marketing efforts or other website efforts you're doing in context in light of these things that affect SEO. It's so much about creating that great experience which you can really gain from this. So let's quickly review some tools that you can use to get insight into some of those factors which we reviewed. all of these tools except one are free. They're all third-party tools, and it really just makes a lot of sense to sign up for, validate, use these tools because it sort of pushes really a wealth of information at you, which you would be remiss not to take advantage of because it doesn't take that much effort on your part. This is one, SEOMOZ, which has been rebranded to Moz. This is their Open Site Explorer tool, and there's a small monthly or yearly fee for this product. It's an online site which allows you to see and compare yourself on a lot of different factors for things that are off the page. So if you see all the off the page factors, you're like, well, I know that inbound links matter to me and have an impact on me. I know that whether I have authority matters to me relative to others, but I don't know where I stand. How do I get information about that? This Moz site or SEOMOZ site gives you that information. So you can see that there's a domain authority score, and you can type in your domain and get that score out of 100. And you can also enter up to 5 additional sites, so competitors or others in your space, to compare and see on a level playing field how does that factor relatively situate you versus them from an SEO perspective. And you get really great stuff here, like how many people are linking to you, how many people are Facebook sharing you, liking you, are you being retweeted. And you can actually watch this stuff in real time. You can see this Just Discover tab, which just looks like a great thing to use on a regular, maybe once a month basis to check out and see if you are being mentioned or if there's a community that's talking about you, your domain, and your pages. Not just to understand how it affects SEO, but to say, maybe I should go engage where that discussion is happening in real time. So that's just a great highlight to pull out and say, this is where you're being discussed. So this is more to do on the HTML and architecture factors. It's a free tool made available by Microsoft. However, it's still what it tells you still applies to Bing and Google search as well. And it just gives you specific things when it crawls your site, which it does very quickly, to say, hey, some of your H1 tags aren't quite right or you don't have them. You know, your HTML title tags, your meta description may be too many keywords, not enough if you're not using them, whether you have duplicate content, some of those things. And you don't have to input anything into this tool beyond your domain, and it comes out with all of these so-called violations, which are things that you can quickly sort of fix up. Now, all sites are going to have some number of violations. This isn't like you need to take 117,000 actions for this thing. A lot of them are template-based. You make one small change, and it flows through and gets rid of a lot of them. And it's okay for some of them to still exist. Again, SEO is about all of these factors together. So it's not just, you know, perfect URL structure and the problem is solved. That's a piece of the pie. And the next two tools are Google-provided free tools, which I hope everyone is using. If you're signed up but not logging into it or not taking advantage of it, I would highly recommend it because it just gives you a wealth of insight and information and actionable stuff, which gives you perspective to make your site better without much effort. And it tries to tell you what your end users, what searchers are experiencing when they come to your site, and allows you to prioritize your efforts. So how do they get to your site? You know, in particular, crawl errors, if there are any, to make sure that your site is visible. The markup that I talked about earlier for the structured data, the semantic web. In Google Webmaster Tools, you can literally sort of drag and drop the label stuff to control what your search results look like in Google. And that helps Google, that helps users, and it helps you. All very easy stuff. And then, of course, Google Analytics, which I think almost everyone has on their site, but maybe they don't go in and actually use the information that's shared beyond how many visitors that I have, is it increasing or not. There's just a ton of additional information about your page speed with specific recommendations that it makes without you having to sort of take any action. Finding out how users get to your site. So, when you're trying to push your content out, how do they actually get there? Is it from other sites? Is it from search engines? Are the keywords, this is part of the SEO, are the keywords they're getting to you the ones that you would expect? Does that surprise you? Does that indicate that there could be other ways that you could present your content that would alter that, make it better? Right? All these things shared. And they keep revving. They keep making updates to both of these tools really rapidly, and just gives you a wealth of information. So that's the big picture view of SEO. It's about creating great content, having a great user experience on your website. Because of that, getting inbound links, maintaining this big picture view, using tools to get visibility, and then prioritizing your efforts on kind of a continual basis. So, things don't get stale. Things stay engaging and fresh. Just going through that cycle. So hopefully that has provided some clarity into the transparency of SEO and why it's changed, and how to think about embedding this into your marketing website efforts. Are there questions?
Yep, just a reminder, if you have a question for Ryan, you can submit it using the question function located in the GoToWebinar control panel at the right side of your screen. Another reminder, we will be sending the presentation and the recording out shortly after the webinar, so if you're anxious to use some of the tools that he showed, you could see the URLs for those. Just before I start the first question, we have a ton of questions, so if we don't get to yours, we'll definitely follow up with you through email. The first one is, how does Google know how long you stay on a site or whether you bounce away quickly?
Yeah, so that was one of the factors on the page where Google knows if they're going to give you the top search result for a given search term. If people go there and stay and click around elsewhere on the site and are staying more than a couple seconds there, that's indicative that they succeeded. They gave you the information that you were looking for. So how do they gauge that? There's multiple ways they do. We just talked about Google Analytics and how so many people have that on their site. That's great. It's free. It gives you all that information for analytics on your page. But it also tells Google whether people are bouncing away from your site. Right? That information is available to you, but Google can use that to affect search engine rankings. So having Google Analytics, if people constantly come to your site and are gone within 1 or 2 seconds, it's going to tell Google, I shouldn't recommend this anymore because it didn't work for the other people. There's also a Google toolbar you can put in your browser, which less people are using because they're baked in, but that gives them information for people that have that installed about whether people are bouncing or whether a given site or a response is sticky. There's also a notion of Google ping pong. So if you click on that first result, Google knows you clicked on that via JavaScript, and then you go to that site and click the back button. When you click on any one of the other results on that page, Google knows the time that spanned there, and they can figure out if you're bouncing based on that as well. There's also a new, a fourth way, I guess, there's a new survey tool that Google just announced as a free option that you can have pop up to survey your end users to say, how can we make this website better? That's great for you. That's great. Google's offering that for free. But they also, behind the scenes, get the information if everyone thinks your site isn't that great or that others are more great than you. That can influence the rankings. Great.
Okay, the next question is, will we be making the periodic SEO table available as a PDF download? And we will also share the link to that so you can download it and print it off and use it for the future.
Yeah, and that's there's a site. It's on the Search Engine Land site. Again, that was not a One North created asset. That's something that Search Engine Land has created, which we adhere to, and makes a ton of sense. And there's a lot more information on their site beyond just that PDF, so you can peruse that as well for additional context.
The next one is, for links and tweets, does it need to be a direct link back to our site, or do bit.lys have the same impact?
Yeah, so Google is aware, or search engines are aware how common it is to use these URL shorteners, and it's actually required in Twitter. So that kind of 301 redirect from a shortened URL to your actual URL is a complete pass-through. You don't lose any value by using the shortened URL.
Is Google Webmaster free?
Yes, yeah. All the tools except for the SEOMOZ tool are completely free. You just have to, in Google Webmaster Tools, it'll give you really easy instructions for how to set that up on your site. If you don't host your site yourself, there are a couple ways you can really quickly verify that the site is yours, which is obviously an important identity aspect of doing that. But once it's set up, the data's there, and you can just start going through it. So it's very, very transparent, easy to do.
Okay, the next one is, if hidden text is a punishment, does that mean that using the comment tag in page coding for internal purposes can affect SEO negatively?
No, without doing it to extreme, right? Google's really just going to ignore that stuff, and they're aware why that exists. It doesn't exist to serve end users anyway, so it's just going to ignore that. It's not going to use that for additional keyword value.
Okay, the next one is the HTML title tag different from the URL?
So yeah, your URL is what you go to in the browser, HTTP, your domain.com. And the HTML title tag is something that shows in the title bar of your browser, right? If you look at a Google search result, you'll see both the URL, which is the identifier on the web for that unique page, and the title tag is more human text to describe what that given page's topic is about. So they're two separate things. Oftentimes, they will contain very similar words or keywords. The URL doesn't have spaces in it. The HTML title tag will. Yeah, so they both are ultimately used in similar ways for SEO, but signify and do different things for your website to work.
Okay, the next one is, you mentioned that the SEO metadata description doesn't hold much ranking weight, but is important for the search results summary. What about metadata keywords? Do they hold any ranking weight these days?
So a lot of the SEO value for the metadata description is the fact that end users ultimately see it. The meta keywords aren't ultimately seen by anyone. It's just there for you to tell search engines, this is what my topics are about. And ultimately, if that's consistent with the topics you're discussing, with the HTML title tag, with the URL, with the other stuff on your site, then it can just be a corroboration of that. But if it isn't there, it doesn't seem like you're really missing much, right, when you think like a search engine. And if it's different than other things that are on your page, it's not going to jive, and it's going to seem like there's a bit of a game or a trick going on. So it's because it got abused, it's essentially become a null for usage.
The next one is, for social sharing SEO, any particular service rank above others, Twitter, Google+, etc.?
So it's more of a numbers game rather than the search engines particularly saying this property is more important than the other. So a lot more people share a lot more links of interest with context on Twitter than they do other places. And that context is more useful than just a like, for example. So it's not a strict rule of this is 25% more important than the other. It's that as a numbers game, Twitter makes a lot of sense to be something that you target really well. And it's something that so many people use and consume, regardless if they go to a search engine, to get them to come to your site. So it makes a ton of sense. Is there a notion a lot of people have poked to say, well, wait, is Google Plus really there to just help the search rankings, and is there a lot more additional value because of that? It would be dangerous for Google to do so, to shun the others for that effect. And in so many other things, they've been really careful to not be biased for their own properties. And there's been a couple cases where it appeared they were doing that, but they came out and explained what actually happened. And it's essential that we trust them, or they lose the game. And so breaching that trust for some small advantage for their own social network isn't something that seems likely. So that question, I mean, I think you're trying to say, well, where should I focus my efforts? And that would go back to the numbers game from a Twitter perspective, and how end users use that service relative to others, especially in a professional world.
All right, and our final question is, can you recommend blogs to follow on this topic?
Sure. I mean, Search Engine Land is one that shared and has assimilated and distilled all this information into that one page of the SEO periodic table. They have a lot more depth and verbiage around all of these things, so that's a great one to follow. The Moz, Moz.com, rebranded from SEOMOZ, which has the product, is a great blog that shares good insights and puts a lot of perspective around this. And then certainly Google has one, Google Webmaster Central .blogspot, which is great insight directly from Google on this topic. And it's not like you should follow those to learn new tricks, but they're really reinforcing, and especially over the last year and a half or so, reinforcing, do great things for users, do great things for your content, and the rest will follow.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.